Okay, good morning, students. Today's topic is stress management. First of all, let's understand what is meant by stress. So at the end of this session, you'll be able to understand what job stress is and what are the two phases of job stress, then the nature of job stress, and what are the sources and consequences of stress, what a person can do or organization does for the management of stress, what is meant by burnout, and then, as we have already seen, we'll sum up with organizational change. So let's get started. Stress. So as you can see from the image, it is a kind of mental pressure that an employee suffers in due course of his or her work in an organizational setup. Now, it is very natural for an employee working in an organization to have stress because there are lots of sources that are responsible for stress. Now, let's see what are these sources and what leads to stress. So, as far as the definition of stress is concerned, it's a physical and emotional reaction to pressure, change, or fear of the unknown. So, when a person has a kind of fear and the person is slightly worried about an uncertain future, or there are some changes to which a person cannot physically or emotionally adapt to, and there are job requirements or work pressures, so that has an emotional reaction. So this emotional or physical reaction that then employee feels is called stress. So stress is the total response to an environmental condition or stimulus. And the stimulus, of course, can be work pressure, related to work pressure, or change, or fear of the unknown in an organization. So you see, an employee, when he or she works in an organization, there are certain issues that need to be addressed. For example, if an employee is having some problem or some grievance, that needs to be addressed. So if that is not addressed, it will lead to a stressful condition of an employee or a stressful situation. Now, these conditions can be unhealthy work environment or undue pressures of job role, or it can even be the autocratic nature of the manager of the employee. If a manager chooses to be slightly dictatorial in terms of his style of managing employees, so that can lead to pressure, and this pressure is called stress. So एक organization में क्या होता है कि बहुत सारी conditions हैं जो कि एक employee को stress दे सकती हैं. वो उस organization का culture हो सकता है, वो unresolved grievances हो सकती हैं employees की, या फिर उस organization में जो leadership है उसका एक डिक्टेटोरियल या एक तरफा आप कह लो कि मैनेजमेंट स्टाइल, वो कभी कभी स्ट्रेस को जन्म देता है. तो दीज आर ऑल कॉल्ड स्टिमुलस एंड दीज आर ऑल एनवायरमेंटल फैक्टर्स विच लीड टू स्ट्रेस. ये सारी चीजें जो है उस स्ट्रेस को एक प्रकार से स्टिमुलेट करती है एम्प्लॉय में. तो ये जो स्ट्रेस होता है जो एम्प्लॉय फील करता है, इसको ऑक्यूपेशनल या जॉब रिलेटेड स्ट्रेस भी बोलते हैं. अब ये जो ऑक्यूपेशनल स्ट्रेस होता है या जॉब रिलेटेड स्ट्रेस होता है, ये एडवर्स रिएक्शन होता है जो कि बिकॉज ऑफ एक्सेसिव वर्क प्रेशर या एक्सेसिव डिमांड्स ऑफ द जॉब के कारण हो सकता है. फॉर एग्जांपल, एक एम्प्लॉय है जो कि जिसके वर्किंग आवर्स बहुत लॉन्ग है और उसको छुट्टी नहीं मिलती, तो दैट एम्प्लॉय विल बी अंडर अ लॉट ऑफ स्ट्रेस. या एक एम्प्लॉय है जो कि ऐसी कंडीशन में काम करता है जो कि खुद ब खुद स्ट्रेसफुल हो, जैसे कि एक डॉक्टर एक इमरजेंसी डिपार्टमेंट में काम कर रहा है, तो अगर एक डॉक्टर इमरजेंसी डिपार्टमेंट में काम कर रहा है, नेचुरली उसके पास खूब सारे पेशेंट्स आएंगे और उसका कोई टाइमिंग नहीं रहेगा। तो उसका वो जो जॉब रिलेटेड जो प्रोफाइल रहेगा वो उसको इट विल पुट हिम अंडर अ लॉट ऑफ प्रेशर, राइट? सो इट कैन बी द डिमांड्स placed on employees because of the nature of work that the employees are doing, and because of the environment in which the employee is working. So these can be the basic stimulus from which stress can generate or stress can emanate. So stress is not an illness, right? It is a state, just a reaction है. However, अगर ये स्ट्रेस बहुत लंबे समय तक चलता है, excessive and prolonged period of time, then it can lead to mental and physical illness. तो इससे कोई ना कोई illness develop हो जाती है. तो आपने ये भी देखा होगा कि जैसे कि जो आर्मी पर्सनल है जो कि बॉर्डर पे तैनात किए जाते हैं, उनको रोटेट किया जाता है. मतलब उनकी जो ड्यूटी होती है वो हर 3 महीने में शिफ्ट कर देते हैं, उनको रोटेट करते हैं, नए लोग आके उनकी जगह ले लेते हैं, क्योंकि जिस एनवायरनमेंट में वो काम करते हैं वो बहुत स्ट्रेसफुल रहता है. सो इफ अ सोल्जर इज डिप्लॉयड ऑन द बॉर्डर एरिया फॉर continuous period of time, so naturally because of the working conditions there, the place where the soldier is deployed, the soldier will have a lot of stress, and that will lead to some kind of mental or physical illness. So what the people do in armed forces is that they replace them. I mean, after 3 months, they are told to go back to their barracks or they go on leave, and fresh people come there and take the position. So in this way, they kind of manage the stress. So this is the way of, avoiding a prolonged exposure to stress, because it will lead to some mental or physical illness, right? So this is how they are de-stressed. Now, what is job stress? See, organization life is quite stressful because you are given tasks and assignments, and there are deadlines to be met. तो आपको जो काम दिया जाएगा वो कुछ डेडलाइंस में आपको मीट करना पड़ेगा. तो वर्क प्रेशर रहेगा, टाइट शेड्यूल्स रहेंगे, है ना, और मीटिंग्स, उसके बीच में मीटिंग्स आ जाएंगी. आपको एक काम दिया है, फिर दूसरे की डिमांड आ जाएगी, उसके बीच में मीटिंग का फरमान आ जाएगा. तो आप ये देखोगे कि आप लगातार you are chasing deadlines and you are under a lot of pressure to complete the task that is assigned to you. So on top of this, you will have unhelpful colleagues जो आपकी backbiting करेंगे, आपकी शिकायतें करेंगे, आपको they will cut you down to size in front of your bosses because they want to belittle your efforts, and there is competition, dog eat dog world. Then there will be bosses who will be always finding faults because there are top bosses who are sitting on them also who will have excessive demands. So they'll have to, pass on this pressure to you as an employee. And if you are a boss yourself, then you will have incompetent subordinates. कि आपके नीचे जो काम करने वाले लोग हैं, उनके पास वो skills ही नहीं होंगी, तो उनका काम भी आपको आधा करना पड़ेगा. तो आपके पास खुद का काम तो है करने को, ऊपर से आपके ऊपर बीइंग अ बॉस ये भी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हो जाएगी कि जो अनस्किल्ड लोग आपने अपने नीचे पाल के रखे हैं किसी कारण, या वो घुस गए संस्था में, तो उनका काम भी आप कर रहे हो. तो you will end up doing their job and you will end up doing your job, and that will put you under a lot of stress, because managing the entire workforce will be a stressful exercise in itself. And on top of that, if you have 4 or 5 incompetent employees who do not have the skills to do their own work, your work will pile on, and that will lead to a lot of stress, right? So a host of other irritating factors. So these are some factors like meetings, schedules, deadlines, incompetent employees, critical bosses. So these will have a cumulative effect that will lead to irritation, development of irritation in your mind, and Therefore, your life will become slightly miserable at times, right? So you will experience some tension. So stress can be basically understood as stage of tension, which is experienced by individual employees because of extraordinary demand and constraints of the current work scenario, right? So there are demands of multitasking. There are demands of doing things which normally is done by 2 or 3 people, and then there are deadlines to be met because there is a competition. Other people are doing it in a given time period. Then, of course, that will be a benchmark for you to follow. And all these situations or constraints will lead to a lot of stress, right? So these are basically the stimulus which are present in an environment, in an organizational environment, that lead to stress. तो ये सारी चीजें जो है वो एक एम्प्लॉय को स्ट्रेस देती है. So now that we have understood stress, now we have to understand that there is not all negativity that is associated with stress. Stress can also be, there can be some positivity also associated with stress, right? So there is one stress which is called constructive stress or eustress, and there is another stress which is called destructive stress or distress. Now let's see what's the difference between the two, right? So the concept of appropriate doses of stress is highly important. So when you make an extra effort to reach out to your goals, then you are putting yourself under some stress which is positive in nature, because that brings out the best in you, right? That brings out the best in your abilities. So you kind of harness your abilities, which otherwise will remain unharnessed or untapped. So if you are capable of running at 100 speed, unless and until you put stress on your body, you will not be able to achieve that speed. So till the time that you reach your optimum level, whatever stress that you undergo is called positive stress or constructive stress or eustress. So this is positive. So if you are making an effort and extra effort to learn a skill, if you are making an extra effort to learn English communication skills or even some AI skills or AI tools, then you are putting yourself under stress, of course. But then this is positive because this brings out the positive things in you. So till some level, till the optimum level is achieved, the stress is positive in nature, but because it will have some positive effect on you. But beyond that limit of optimum point, if you further continue to have stress, then that stress will be inclined towards negative stress. So it will be called negative stress or distress or destructive stress, right? So this negative stress, if it is prolonged for a period of time or over a period of time, then it might lead to something which is called as burnout, right? So beyond the optimum limit, if the stress is prolonged, then it will lead to some negative consequences, and the most negative out of them is burnout. People will catch some disease or they'll have some mental psychological conditions, and that will be because they have been exposed to a prolonged period of stress. Fine. So as we have seen, there are two phases of stress. First one is positive stress or eustress. It is also called as constructive stress. And the second one is called destructive stress. That is, beyond the optimum level, if the stress is continued, then it enters the domain of negativity, and therefore it's called destructive stress. Now, so as I've explained in the previous slides, stress can be of two types, positive or negative. Stress is, of course, a state of tension experienced by individuals because of extraordinary demands of the workplace, or there are some constraints or some opportunities. So stress therefore can be positive or negative. So if a workplace is slightly challenging in nature, and then you try to meet that challenge and that brings out the best in you, then that tension that you receive as a result of it is positive, and this thing is called positive stress. But then beyond a limit, if it's continued for an unreasonable period of time or prolonged period of time, it becomes disturbing, and it rises your anxiety, and therefore it enters the domain of negativity. It's called negative stress. So now we talk about the general adaptation syndrome. Now, Staley considered stress a non-specific response to any demand made upon an organism. So he said that there were actually three phases of the defense reaction that a person has towards adaptation of a stressful condition. तो आपकी जो बॉडी या आप खुद किसी स्ट्रेसफुल कंडीशन को एक्सपोज होते हैं, तो आपकी बॉडी कैसे रिएक्ट करती है उसको तीन फेजेस में उन्होंने समझाया है. तो सबसे पहले क्या होता है कि अलार्म की सिचुएशन आती है, एंड देन देयर इज अ रेजिस्टेंस, एंड फाइनली it leads to mental and physical exhaustion. So the three stages to syndrome of evolution or general adaptation syndrome are: first is alarm, second is resistance, and third is exhaustion. Alarm पहले होता है कि you are taken aback, you show your resistance, and in the process of being exposed to a stressful condition, it leads to physical and mental exhaustion. So manifestation of stress. Now this stress, how does it manifest? ये कैसे दिखाता है अपने आप को, ये कैसे उभर के आता है? तो आप देखते हैं कि कुछ लोग शाम को जब घर जाते हैं तो वो इस कंडीशन में नहीं होते कि वो अपने परिवार वालों के साथ बात कर सके, वो सीधे जाके सो जाते हैं, अगर खाना भी नहीं खा पाते कभी कभी तो, राइट? तो इसका मतलब है कि दे आर फिजिकली एग्जॉस्टेड, they are even mentally exhausted, क्योंकि उन्होंने जो काम किया है वो मेंटल फिजिकल नेचर. इवन मेंटल, आप मेंटल ज्यादा काम करते हैं तो इट्स मोर एग्जॉस्टिंग देन फिजिकल वर्क, राइट? सो ये जो स्ट्रेस होता है ये कभी कुछ फिजियोलॉजिकल कंडीशंस में भी अपने आप को व्यक्त करता है. फिजियोलॉजिकल मतलब रिलेटेड टू बॉडी फंक्शंस. तो स्ट्रेस जो अपने आप को मैनिफेस्ट करता है या अपने आप को जो उभर के दिखाता है, तो या तो आपकी फिजिकल कंडीशन में दिखाएगा या आपकी मेंटल कंडीशन में दिखाएगा. या एक साइकोलॉजिकल कंडीशन में दिखाएगा. ठीक है, अब ये सब क्या हो सकता है कि जो स्ट्रेस है वो एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अंदर, it can be because of following 10 reasons. The first is occupational demands. कि आप जो है वो एक फ्रंटलाइन पोजीशन में बैठे हैं जहां पर कि खूब सारे क्लाइंट्स आते हैं और उनकी डेली आपको प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करनी पड़ती है. Sometimes the clients argue also, and sometimes there are heated discussion, and because you being an employee and they being the client, so you have to take whatever thing that they give you, and that because of your work profile becomes quite stressful. And also the example of a doctor working in an emergency ward, that also I've given. तो ये जब ऑक्यूपेशनल डिमांड आती है जो कि थोड़ी सी अनरीजनेबल कभी कभी हो जाती है या फिर ऐसी हो जाती है जो कि आप फिजिकली अकेले मैनेज नहीं कर पाते, तो ये स्ट्रेस को लीड करती है, राइट? दूसरा होता है रोल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट. कि सपोज there's a conflict because of role ambiguity. Employees do not have a clear-cut idea about what their role in the organization is. It is ambiguous. So it leads to role conflict, and that also is a stressful condition. Role overload. कि जब भी कोई नया काम आता है तो एक बंदे को ही दिया जाता है, उसी को दिया जाता है, because he is a very sincere and trustworthy person. So he ends up taking all the workload in an office, and other people go scot-free because they themselves have created a perception that they cannot be trusted with work. So that will also lead to stress. This is called work overload or role underload. Suppose you are not given work, so you will feel कि अरे क्या हो रहा है? That will also lead to stress. Interpersonal relationship. See, the culture of the organization plays a very vital role. That is how employees treat each other and how they are treated by the management. So if there is something negative about this, or if the environment of an organization is toxic in nature, so that will lead to negative interpersonal relationships, and ultimately it will lead to a stressful environment and condition. And that will not bear too well on people who are working in the organization. तो अगर एक environment का culture ही toxic है कि लोग एक दूसरे की शिकायत करते हैं और organization या office politics बहुत होती है और उस organization का culture ही ऐसा है, so naturally you will have unhelpful colleagues who will be backbiting against you and who will never cooperate, and they will look out for opportunities to isolate and demean you. So that will also lead to stress because of negative interpersonal relationship. Ineffective communication. Communication is the lifeblood of an organization. If the organization doesn't have proper communication, people will not know what they are supposed to do. And if this is the case, then it will lead to a lot of mistakes, which will again put people under a lot of stress. Because if people make mistakes, they'll be reprimanded by their bosses, and again they will be subjected to a stressful condition, right? And then there is job change. See, a person, if he or she goes to a new job assignment, then there is a period that a person takes to settle down, and then only after the person has settled down that he or she begins to perform. So if there are frequent job changes, because these settling down periods are slightly stressful in nature because everything is new, you have to find your way in the organization. You have to, make yourself entrenched in the organization. For that, you'll have to make extra effort. You are actually out of your comfort zone, so that puts you under a lot of stress. So if there are frequent job changes, then also it can be a reason for stress. And finally, of course, I've told you about the climate of the company. Climate means the environment, how people are treated, or the politics of an organization, or if the politics is there or if it's not there, that will also have an impact, right? So these are this 10 basic factors or organizational factors that leads to stress. So these are organizational personal factors that are causes of stress. So ये सारे 10 जो factors बताए गए हैं, ये they lead to stress. तो ये first जो थे organizational थे, अब आते हैं personal पे. तो पर्सनल फैक्टर्स क्या हो सकते हैं? द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ लाइफ चेंज, है ना? कि जैसे मान लीजिए कि किसी के घर पे कोई प्रॉब्लम है, उसका स्पाउस के साथ सेपरेशन हो गया, उनके घर में कोई बीमार है, उनके घर में उनके स्पाउस से बनती नहीं है, a person is facing a legal court case, so that will also have an impact on the person's organizational life. तो वो जो स्ट्रेस पे रहेगा तो उसका इम्पैक्ट उसके वर्क में भी दिखेगा, ठीक है? देन टाइप ए एंड टाइप बी पर्सनैलिटी. टाइप ए आर पीपल हु आर having a very positive outlook, they're optimistic, and type B are one who are negative, or you can say they're pessimistic, so they will also always have a negative view of life. But the optimist type A will always have a positive outlook towards life. So what kind of personality a person is, that will also have a bearing on his stress level. So people who worry too much, always see negative in things, will of course be always under a lot of stress, which will ultimately lead to some physiological condition or illness that will show on their body. Then there are other reasons, So personal factors, as I told you, somebody is undergoing a court case, somebody is not keeping well, somebody in home is not keeping well. So maybe that person needs to keep himself or herself awake for the whole night and take care of the person. And because of that, the person might be arriving late to the office. So that can also be the personal reason for the person to be under stress. So these are the personal factors that will ultimately put a person under a lot of stress. So what are the factors influencing work stress? First are demands, and especially unrealistic demands. So as per the scientific studies, if you can, recall the ones that we have done in the module number 1, it was found that a person can only work and maintain the work-life balance if the person works for 8 hours a day. Now, people, as you know, in the corporate world are talking about 90 hours and then 50 hours and 100 hours, no holidays. So this will actually destabilize the equilibrium between the organizational life and the personal life of a person. So if extraordinary demands are put on an employee, the equilibrium between work life and personal life will be disturbed, and this will cause a lot of stress. So everybody needs to unwind. Everybody needs to have a Sunday in which the person recharges himself for the coming week. But then if you keep Sundays as working days, then ultimately people will have a negative impact on their work-life balance, because they have to give time to their families too. And there's only one Sunday that everybody looks up to. And if you, as a manager, are going to even take this prerogative out from an employee's life, then of course it will have a negative influence on the person's relationship within his family, and this will cause stress. Change. So any kind of change will bring in stress. Change in the organizational culture, change in the organizational structure, change in the organizational leadership will cause stress, because now the employee has to adjust to this change, which is kind of stressful in nature. Management style, if it is autocratic, dictatorial, one-sided, no communication, employees can't say their thing and they have to just be listeners, then of course this will be a stress. So as we have seen, in dictatorial style, when the manager goes out of mood, people shout and curse. Why is that? Because people want to vent out their displeasure. So if management style in a company or an organization is dictatorial in nature, autocratic in nature, it will lead to a stressful condition. Working conditions. Suppose somebody goes to work where ventilation is not proper, the person is sweating from morning till evening, or there are loud noises that are coming. For example, a person is working in a workshop where machines are making a terrible sound. Ultimately, there will be a medical condition that the employee will face. Or a person who is going for night shifts all the time, the person will have a cardiac issue. So all these factors or demands or conditions will ultimately lead to work stress. So these will be demands, relationship, change, management style, and working conditions. This will all lead to stress. Now, since we have understood what stress is and the kind of stress and the reasons that cause stress, let's look at what are the consequences of stress. So first is subjective effect. Subjective is very personal to a person, personal to a person. It will lead to anxiety, aggression, apathy. Anxiety, aggression is that person might become aggressive. You might crack a joke and person will snap at you because the person is under a lot of stress. It will take it personal. Apathy is lack of concern. The person might develop lack of concern and lack of commitment if there is stress. Boredom because of the monotony of the work, but person put a lot of stress. Fatigue and frustration, of course, physical fatigue and frustration. Guilt, shame, and irritability. Low self-esteem, moodiness, tension, nervousness, and loneliness. This will be the subjective influences, effects on a person. The person will feel. These words are self-explanatory in nature. Second is behavioral effects. Now, some people there'll be accident proneness. I was working in my previous organization and there was a lot of stress because people were called on Sundays and they were given examination duties, and people were working for 7 days a week. After a period of time, all the faculty members started falling ill, and most of them who were coming by two-wheelers even had accidents on the highways. It was a common feature in the organization. This was because they were under a lot of mental stress. They were not able to switch it off, and that resulted in accident proneness. Some people resort to drug abuse. They resort to alcoholism, smoking, because they kind of feel, they kind of try to get comfort from this, but this ultimately leads to even bigger problem, causes more stress. Emotional outbursts, people who are not able to respond to dictatorial bosses will give you emotional outbursts because there's a limit for everything, right? So beyond that elastic limit, if you try to bend people, they will of course give you outbursts, then you should be ready for the consequences, right? Excessive eating, this is a psychological condition. The people, when they're in stress, they will eat a lot because that gives them a kind of psychological satisfaction or reprieve, as you can say. So excessive eating or loss of appetite, the other way around, people will even lose their appetite because they're under stressful condition. So drug abuse, and as I told you, excessive drinking, smoking, excitability, road rage cases, people who are under stress, if they by chance run into somebody who might have accidentally caused some minor stuff with their vehicle, they will just get out of the vehicle and do something exceptionally bad, like you take the example of Navjeet Singh Sidhu, who had a case of road rage on him because and I think a case of manslaughter was also put against him. And this might be due to a stressful condition that a person might be having at the workplace. Impulsive behavior, doing things without thinking, impaired speech, lack of clarity in speech, nervous laughter, and restlessness or trembling. And even, trembling is आपका हाथ कब कपाता है वगैरह. So these are all behavioral effects जो पर्सन के बिहेवियर में से शो होते हैं. कॉग्निटिव इफेक्ट कि आपकी जो कॉग्निटिव एबिलिटी होती है, जो आपके 5 सेंसेस है, वो थोड़े उसमें डेंट पड़ जाता है, ब्लंट हो जाते हैं. इनएबिलिटी टू मेक डिसीजंस एंड कॉन्सेंट्रेट, तो आपकी कॉग्निटिव एबिलिटीज जो है वो डाउन हो जाती है, तो आप करेक्ट डिसीजंस नहीं ले पाते, आपका ब्रेन में फॉग आ जाता है. फ्रीक्वेंट फॉरगेटफुलनेस एंड हाइपर सेंसिटिविटी टू क्रिटिसिज्म, मेंटल ब्लॉक्स, ये सब आपके कॉग्निटिव इफेक्ट होते हैं. फिजियोलॉजिकल, मतलब जो आपके बॉडी में दिखता है वो क्या है, हाई बीपी हो जाता है. देन और भी बहुत सारी बीमारियां हो जाती हैं कि ग्लूकोज लेवल हाई हो गया, हार्ट रेट इंक्रीज हो गया, ड्राइनेस ऑफ माउथ, स्वेटिंग, कफ एंड कोल्ड स्पेल्स, नंबनेस, यानी कि आपका जो हाथ पर सुन्न पड़ जाते हैं. ये सब स्ट्रेस का नतीजा है जो आपकी बॉडी में दिखाई देता है. बॉडी आपको साइंस देती है कि आप एक स्ट्रेसफुल कंडीशन में हैं. ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल इफेक्ट क्या होता है कि एम्प्लॉय क्या लगता है, एब्सेंटिज्म, अपने वर्क से बाहर लगता है. पुअर इंडस्ट्रियल रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन मैनेजमेंट एंड द एम्प्लॉइज, एम्प्लॉइज और मैनेजमेंट के बीच में रिलेशनशिप और खराब होने लगते हैं. जिसके कारण प्रोडक्टिविटी लेवल्स कम हो जाती हैं। और जैसा कि एम्प्लॉयज के एक्सीडेंट्स होते थे, मैंने आपको बताया ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के बाहर, ये एम्प्लॉयज जो कि वर्क स्टेशन पे काम करते हैं, मशीन्स पे काम करते हैं, उनका भी एक्सीडेंट्स होने लगता है, क्योंकि उनका कॉन्सेंट्रेशन लेवल नीचे चला जाता है। कॉन्सेंट्रेशन नीचे चला जाता है तो वो लापरवाही से काम करने लग जाते हैं और उनका एक्सीडेंट हो जाता है। लेबर टर्नओवर यानी कि लोग छोड़ छोड़ के भागने लगते हैं। ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का क्लाइमेट खराब हो जाता है, क्योंकि आयाराम गयाराम वाली स्थिति हो जाती है। एंटैगनिज्म एट वर्क यानी कि लड़ाई झगड़े होते हैं ना, पीपल स्ट्रेस में रहते हैं, वो एक दूसरे पे निकालते हैं, which all ultimately leads to job dissatisfaction. तो ये सब कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस हैं स्ट्रेस के। सब्जेक्टिव इफेक्ट्स जो व्यक्ति में दिखते हैं, बिहेवियरल उसके बिहेवियर में, कॉग्निटिव जो उसके सोचने समझने की क्षमता है, फिजियोलॉजिकल जो उसके बॉडी के रूप में दिखते हैं, बॉडी पे दिखते हैं जैसे कि इलनेस वगैरह, और ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल इफेक्ट यानी कि उसका एब्सेंटिज्म और उसका टर्नओवर रेट एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का बढ़ जाता है। अब इसका मैनेजमेंट कैसे करना है? स्ट्रेस तो हर जगह होगा। आज की जो लाइफ है वो क्वाइट स्ट्रेसफुल है। एक जमाना था, आप याद करेंगे कि आपके जो फादर के साइड या आपके दादाजी जिस कंडीशंस में काम करते थे वो इतनी स्ट्रेसफुल नहीं होती थी। क्यों? क्योंकि कंपटीशन कम था, अपॉर्चुनिटीज ज्यादा थी, तो लोगों की लाइफ में एक अच्छा वर्क लाइफ बैलेंस था। आई रिमेम्बर दैट माई फादर यूज्ड टू कम होम एट 4 o'clock. So I can never foresee a situation for myself where I reach home at 4 o'clock. And then he used to do a lot of things like gardening, keeping pets, and he used to go for meeting his friends and stuff. So there was a good work-life balance, you know. So right now this thing is not there because of the excessive demands in an organizational workplace. So how do you deal with these stressful conditions? How do you manage stress? First is keep a pet. That will be a kind of stress buster. अगर आप तोता पालते हैं, कुत्ता बिल्ली पालते हैं, तो आपको उनसे बात करके एक अच्छा लगता है, आपका यू कैन रिलैक्स, से योर प्रेयर्स, आप ध्यान कर सकते हैं, एंड दैट विल गिव यू अ लॉट ऑफ मेंटल पीस। सिंग अलाउड, आप गाना वगैरह गा के अपने मन को बहला सकते हैं। You can watch laughter shows that will also help you to de-stress. Kapil Sharma show and stuff. Sleep right. If you take 8 hours sleep a day, naturally you will wake up with your batteries charged and you'll be able to take on the new day with vigor and full of energy. But if you lose out on your 8 hours sleep, then again it will pile on your already stressed levels, leading to a negative condition. Be good at loving. I mean, you ultimately talking to your family will, of course, help you to de-stress. So spreading love and affection, of course, is necessary to de-stress yourself. Spend time with children, family. Take a walk. If you walk, take evening walks, you know, and look at environment and trees and stuff. Then, if you're looking at a workstation and that to a screen for 8 to 9 hours, this will actually help you. If you go out in the evening and sit in a park and look at things, it will help you to de-stress. Make friends, spend time with them. This will help you to de-stress. Enjoy TV or some other hobby. Cultivate some interest, you know, pursue some hobby that will help you to put yourself under a lot of relaxation. Dare to dream. Think of some target to achieve and make yourself busy in that. That will help you to de-stress yourself. So how do we manage stress at organization level? Now the question is that we have seen how to manage stress at the individual level, but how to manage stress at organizational level? So first of all, give role clarity. This is what you have to do, and that's the end of it. Right? There can't be endless demands of work. If people do that, then they will lose out on good employees, you know. तो एक ऑप्टिमम लेवल ऑफ वर्क होता है और उतनी क्लैरिटी एम्प्लॉय को देनी चाहिए कि आपका ये काम है ना, और उसके बियॉन्ड उसको ओवरलोड नहीं करना चाहिए। दूसरा, सपोर्टिव क्लाइमेट, फिर जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का एटमॉस्फेयर है वो उसको सपोर्ट करने वाला होना चाहिए कि whenever the employee gets stuck, then his or her bosses or colleagues should hold out a supportive hand for that employee. Then clear career paths. अगर मान लीजिए किसी एम्प्लॉय को ये समझ में नहीं आ रहा कि what will be the next level that he can look forward to in an organization, that will also put him under stress. So employees should be told in advance when they join an organization what is the career path for them and what they can look up to or expect after 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and where they will ultimately be in time of 5 years, 10 years. So if you don't do this, then of course you will lose out on your best people, and then you will have to do with mediocre people who will ultimately be the reason for your dismissal, right? So you have to have clear career paths for yourself. Company-wide programs. So you can organize, parties, birthdays. You can take people for picnic. This will help them to de-stress, and this will also create a we feeling among the employees. So this is how we manage stress at the organizational level. So if you see this pie chart, it gives you the sources of stress, right? And this is from a general social survey which was done in 2010, and the statistics is from Canada. So see, a person is stressed, or the source of his stress is 62% work, and then time and finances are equal to 12%. So the major source of stress is the work or the organization for an employee. Now again, there was a study done at BMW in South Africa. There also, the occupational stress was found to be 24%, which was highest. And then the next was financial, of course, 18%. And then came your mental and physical. Now, since we have discussed this, what stress is and what are the reasons for it, we'll talk about a term called burnout. अब ये बर्नआउट क्या होता है? बर्नआउट होता है कि अगर किसी को अनरियलिस्टिक और एक्सेसिव डिमांड में बहुत समय तक रखा जाए तो वो बन जाता है एक बर्नआउट केस, है ना, कि उसकी जो पूरी फिजिकल एंड मेंटल फैकल्टीज हैं वो टोटली एग्जॉस्ट हो जाती है। तो ये वो एक्सट्रीम कंडीशन है जहां पर भी एक बंदा एक बहुत लंबे समय से अपने आप को स्ट्रेसफुल कंडीशन में रखा हुआ है और नतीजन अब वो उसकी मेंटल और फिजिकल कैपेसिटी या फैकल्टी स्टोरी पूरी एग्जॉस्ट हो चुकी है और उसको एक बर्नआउट लेवल आ चुका है। जैसे कि एक माचिस की तीली बर्न हो जाती है तो किसी काम की नहीं रहती। तो बर्नआउट मैंने बहुत सारे केसेस देखे अपने करियर में भी कि कुछ लोग जो हाई टारगेट जॉब्स में काम करते थे, after a period of time they got so frustrated that they started doing their own work and they left the job because they got burned out. So because of the unrealistic demands and unrealistic targets that were put on them, they had chronic fatigue, हर समय exhausted रहना, anger, उनसे आप कोई नया काम बताइए तो एकदम से वो काटने को दौड़ते थे, सेल्फ क्रिटिसिज्म, अपने आप ही को एक लो सेल्फ एस्टीम वाले फेज में पहुंच जाते हैं, नेगेटिव थॉट प्रोसेस में रहते हैं, इरिटेबल रहते हैं, इरिटेट बहुत जल्दी हो जाते हैं और उनके अंदर एक फीलिंग रहती है कि वो हर तरफ से अब घेर चुके हैं, उनको रास्ता समझ में नहीं आता बाहर निकलने का, ठीक है, और वो अपने इमोशंस बहुत हाईली उनके टची इमोशंस हो जाते हैं। तो ऐसे बर्नआउट केसेस तब होते हैं जबकि एक एम्प्लॉय को एक स्ट्रेसफुल कंडीशन में बहुत समय तक आप रखिए तो वो एक बर्नआउट केस बन जाता है। और उसके लिए करने का रिजॉल्व करने का तरीका क्या है कि फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आइडेंटिफिकेशन कि व्हाट इज कॉजिंग a person to get burnt out. Prevention, कि हम उसको कैसे प्रिवेंट कर सकते हैं, है ना, कि पहले हम लोग को देखना है कि इसका आइडेंटिफाई करना है कि बर्नआउट क्यों हो रहा है, फिर उसको प्रिवेंट करने का तरीका देखना है कि क्या प्रिवेंट के तरीके हो सकते हैं. Just a second. एंड मीडिएशन, कि उसमें उसके अंदर जाके उसका बीच बचाव करना है और उसको फाइनली रिजॉल्व करना है. नाउ वी कम टू मैनेजिंग स्ट्रेस. तो सबसे पहले अवेयरनेस होनी चाहिए कि व्हाट आर द रीजंस दैट आर कॉजिंग स्ट्रेस. देन देयर शुड बी अ बैलेंस that should be struck, and then it should be controlled. It's called ABC strategy. Action oriented. Manage your time. आपको हर समय बहुत सारे काम एक साथ करने पड़ेंगे, तो आपको प्रायोरिटी डिसाइड करके टाइम एलोकेट करना है. मैनेज अदर पीपल. Some people are sources of stress. Some people are there to help you out to manage people and your relationship. Manage your work environment. So कौन सा एनवायरनमेंट और उसके अंदर कौन सा स्टिमुलस है जो आपको वर्क रेट प्रेशर देता है, उसको आइडेंटिफाई करना जरूरी है, उसको मैनेज करना जरूरी है. इमोशनल ओरिएंटेड अप्रोचेस क्या है, कि इमोशनल ओरिएंटेड अप्रोचेस आर यूजफुल व्हेन द स्ट्रेस यू आर एक्सपीरियंसिंग कम फ्रॉम द वे यू परसीव अ सिचुएशन. तो आपको एक रैशनैलिटी से काम लेना है. अगर आप नेगेटिव ही सोचेंगे तो सब नेगेटिव ही दिखेगा. एंड यूज अफर्मेशन और पॉजिटिविटी टू ओवरकम नेगेटिव थिंकिंग. इससे भी आप बहुत सारी स्ट्रेसफुल कंडीशंस को अवॉइड कर सकते हैं. एक्सेप्टेंस ओरिएंटेड अप्रोच, कि अगर आपने देखा है कि अब ये हर जगह ही ऐसी हालत है, तो आपको उसको एक्सेप्ट करके उसको तरकीब से उसके सॉल्यूशंस ढूंढने चाहिए. तो यूज टेक्निक्स लाइक मेडिटेशन. जैसे अगर स्ट्रेसफुल जॉब है भी, तो आप फिजिकली रिलैक्स करिए, मेंटली रिलैक्स करिए टू काम योर नर्व्स. टेक एडवांटेज ऑफ योर सपोर्ट नेटवर्क लाइक योर फ्रेंड्स, फैमिलीज. आप वेकेशन पे जा सकते हैं, तो दैट विल हेल्प यू टू डी स्ट्रेस. गेट इनफ एक्सरसाइज. आप एक्सरसाइज करेंगे, अगर फिजिकली एग्जॉस्ट करेंगे अपने आप, तो नींद अच्छी आएगी. आप 8 घंटे की नींद लेंगे तो आप इजीली रिकवर कर सकते हैं स्ट्रेसफुल इवेंट से. एंड लर्न हाउ टू चेंज. तो अपने अंदर एक रेजिलियंस पैदा करिए, फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी, कि चेंजेस तो होंगे, हमको अडेप्ट करने हैं. तो अगर आपका ये माइंडसेट बन जाता है तो स्ट्रेस आराम से मैनेज हो सकता है. तो इन कंक्लूजन, टू कंट्रोल योर स्ट्रेस, कंडक्ट अ जॉब एनालिसिस, कि पता करिए कि व्हाट इज एक्चुअली द कॉज ऑफ योर स्ट्रेस, एंड सेट योर प्रायोरिटीज राइट. सबके टाइटल बना के भी हमको इसका फायदा मिले. लर्न गुड टाइम मैनेजमेंट. ज्यादातर लोग जो टाइम वेस्ट करते हैं या टाइम को मैनेज नहीं कर पाते, दे आर अंडर लॉट ऑफ स्ट्रेस, बिकॉज अल्टीमेटली दे प्रोक्रेस्टिनेट वर्क एंड दे आर पुट अंडर लॉट ऑफ स्ट्रेस ऑल्सो. ट्राई टू लेट गो ऑफ नेगेटिव थिंकिंग और हैबिट. अगर हर समय नेगेटिव सोचेंगे तो सब जगह नेगेटिव दिखाई देगी, and that will help hinder your performance and ultimately put you under a lot of stress. Create defenses against stress, like things that you cannot control, you have to stop worrying about them, and things which you can control, you should control them. So that is all about stress and stress management. Hope you have understood this session. If you have any queries, you can reach out to me. Thank you.